So before Professor comes up, I would like to give some brief information about what she has done and what she's doing currently. She's an associate professor of Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies at University of California, Berkeley. She's also an affiliated faculty of International and Area Studies, the joint UC-UCSF medical program, Southeast Asian Studies Center, the Human Rights Center, and the Center for Race and Gender Studies at Berkeley. She has received her BA and MA in Poli-Sci from UC San Diego and her PhD in Poli-Sci from Berkeley. Her research focuses on Southeast Asian and Southeast Asian American studies, refugee migration, transnational and diaspora studies, post-colonial studies, conflict and post-conflict studies, genocide studies, and access, equity, and inclusion of racialized minorities, especially in education. Professor is currently working on 2 book projects. Her scholarly publications include Diasporic Citizenship, Refractions of Home, Cambodia 2007, a decade after the coup, and A Dream Denied, Educational Experiences of Southeast Asian American Youth. In addition to research and teaching, Professor is a longtime community advocate. She has served on numerous boards of directors of organizations working on Asian American issues, including as chair of the board of directors of SEARAC, S-E-A-R-A-C, a Washington-based national pan-Southeast Asian organization, and the National Association for the Education and Advancement of Cambodian, Laotians, and Vietnamese Americans. She's the first Cambodian woman to receive a doctorate and the first Cambodian to join the Senate faculty of the University of California. So without further ado, here's Professor
Good morning. Suasnai and Swakum. 35 years ago, on April 17, the Khmer Rouge marched into Phnom Penh. That fateful spring of 1975 is an indelible historical reference for Cambodians. What would otherwise be a time for celebration of a new year, of August beginning and togetherness, was instead marked by separation and loss, violent uprooting and dispersal. As the dominoes fell, first Phnom Penh, then Saigon, and lastly Vientiane, the promises of peace and prosperity gave way to the horrors of re-education camps, ethnic, political, and religious persecution, mass flight, and exile. For Cambodians, it was the beginning of a spiraling descent into one of the nation's darkest eras. For many survivors, April 17, 1975 was when history stops, when time bends and refracts under the illusion of irreversible rupture. Year zero was not simply a marker of an apocalyptic shift in history, it is an erasure of history, an intraversible temporal divide that is encoded in the way the survivors that we think and speak of our national and personal histories. As a people, change and turmoil are no strangers to us. Our history and that of mainland Southeast Asia was turbulent. Our capitals had been sacked numerous times, our sacred treasures looted and defiled, our people subjugated. We had enjoyed moments and memories of grandeur, but they were punctured by stark reminders of our losses. We have had moments of peace and prosperity, but they were often short-lived. The national injury inflicted by almost 100 years of colonization smarted further in the disillusionment of the post-colonial era. In less than 25 years after independence, the country was flung into self-consuming destruction and renewed loss of sovereignty. Except for a brief decade of reprieve, the nation's recent historical memory is one of war, genocidal revolution, foreign occupation, a state drowning in its own excesses and moral bankruptcy, and a nation bifurcated by geography, time, distance, and ideology. It is here, there, and in betwixt. War, auto-genocide, and exile have left deep and lasting imprints on the surviving communities. Virtually no Cambodian household is untouched by death or disappearances of a family member. Genocide has resulted in almost a generational death, leaving a very young surviving population both inside and outside of Cambodia. For those forcibly scattered in diaspora, exile involves not only a forcible spatial and physical dislocation, but also a spiritual disjuncture. How then, I ask, can nationhood be reconciled over these many schisms? As for many dislocated people, nostalgia becomes a way for us of reclaiming history and identity amidst the loss, the disorientation, and the liminality of the refugee condition. But memory of home and history, as we all know it, is a site fraught with contestation and contradictions. For unlike other experiences of mass violence, autogenocide involves a historical injury that is made even more acute by the fact that it is self-inflicted. The complexity of the issues notwithstanding, to the average Cambodian who had experienced deprivation and decimation of kin and families, there was little denying that Khmer hands had taken Khmer lives. This, in turn, engenders among the surviving refugees a certain ambivalence toward the homeland. The source that connotes the solace of longing, the security of sameness, also evokes the memory of death, of deprivation, signifying both an indelible connection and simultaneously a rupture. For some Cambodian diasporas, memory of and the attachment to the homeland took the form of long-distance nationalism in the continued struggle for national self-determination. Just as politics was the cause of the disconnect from the originary source, politics was also the source of the reconnect. This was particularly true during Vietnam's decade-long occupation in the 1980s, but it is present even today, for some Cambodians continue to feel deeply rooted anxiety about territorial loss and national survival. Nostalgia was and remains infused with a moralizing purpose, and as overseas Cambodians come to view themselves and are viewed by others as the voice of the Cambodian nation that had been silenced by a captured state and the vestigial hope for a colonized homeland. For others, the struggle is against the perils of forgetting. In San Diego, between multiple shifts at a local machine shop, a French-trained pilot, once the prince's own pilot, driven singularly by his love for traditional arts and the memory of home, fashioned a traditional Khmer violin, a thro, out of a baseball bat purchased from a local Kmart, and carved scenes of the Ramayana from discarded paper boxes salvaged from neighborhood dumpsters. It was, in his words, all that is left of Cambodia that he has to bequeath to his children. Others write, even though they had little hope that their work would ever be read, just so that their children would never forget that there is once a rich history before and beyond the killing fields. But these are not isolated instances, for such personal activism thrives in all corners of the diaspora, be it in the Buddhist chants that wafted from makeshift wat, the laments of the thro emanating from Section 8 housing, the colorful sarong swaying in the wind against the bleak grayness of inner city America, or the ornate Khmer lettering on the storefront that punctuate the cultural flattening of suburban America. These are cultural registers of our nationhood. They are expressions of our struggle to reclaim from history that which it has so violently snatched from us. Wedged in the topography of poverty and marginalization is a community determined to reconstitute, anchoring itself to that insistent call of tradition to drown out the cacophony of displacement and rupture. There is no denying that the Khmer nation lives on, as it had done in the past when state and empires were destroyed. We rebuilt then, and we will again. But as always, the question is not just about whether a nation has survived, but whether or not the social and cultural memory of the nation that gives it identity, its life force, that is its soul, whether that survives, and if so, in what forms. For a culture that is still based largely on orality, the death of 1 out of 5 Cambodians and the dispersal of another 500,000 inevitably mark an irreversible rupture in social memory. In fundamental aspects, our recent history reveals shadows of the past. The death and dispersal of the nation's human resources after 1975 left similar imprints as the capture and the carting off of the nation's artists and artisans and the literatis by Siam following the sacking of Angkor. It had similar resonance to the experiences a few centuries ago when under Vietnamese control, Cambodians were made to shed the traditional customs. Conquest, annexation, and colonization have entailed repeated assault on the Khmer national identity. In that regard, there is also no denying that while it has survived, the very fundamental ethos of our nationhood has been dealt a serious blow. That said, what in the past has carried us through the storms of history is pride, the sense of self, of rootedness in genealogy, in a past that is known and understood, in that shared memory that makes a nation a nation. That has been seriously challenged by recent experiences. Perhaps the greater tragedy of the Khmer Rouge is not the loss of lives, it is the loss of meaning and continuity. And above all, what auto-genocide does is to implant a seed of doubt about who we are as Cambodians. The claim of Buddhist compassion, that moral high ground that has elevated us in the past from territorial smallness and the complex that comes with that, and of political vulnerability, had collapsed under the moral indictment of auto-genocide and of the violence that continues to plague Cambodian lives today. The acid thrown on a young girl out of jealousy, the gun that silences critical thoughts, the pen that signs away the nation's heritage, do not just deface, corrupt, or destroy. They gnaw at the nation's soul. Bleak as it may, we must not fear or suppress that history, for even in the gaping wound of loss and rupture, our refuginess is not just a signifier of the living legacies of war, genocide, and forced severance, but also of the indomitable human capacity for resilience. Remembrance is not victimhood, for memory is the wellspring of our courage. And when we cast our sight into the past, it is not simply self-indulging nostalgia, but a way of reconnecting with the many parts of ourselves, of bridging this present that still shocks us with its foreignness, with a past that is familiar, even in its painful reveal, and inspiring because of its painful reveal.